In the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, the majority of the countries around the world pledged to achieve net zero by 2050. Some big names aiming for 2050 net zero are Japan, Korea, Canada, New Zealand, the US, and Brazil. The world's biggest emitter, China, has pledged to achieve net zero by 2060, whereas some countries are still yet to make the announcement. But what exactly is net zero? Net zero has become a household name in climate change. Everybody is talking about it, and everybody wants to do something about it. This makes us think that the race to net zero is vital towards managing climate change. But what does net zero exactly mean? Human activities have contributed to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and this is warming the planet. When we first think about stopping global warming, we think about how to stop the rising of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. To stop that, we have to start from the source. This means we have to minimize releasing greenhouse gases. However, looks like just minimizing is not the solution to control global warming. Before we dive into understanding net zero, we first have to understand our magic number, 1.5 degrees Celsius. Let's look at the history. The issue of climate change became prominent towards the end of the 20th century. In 1992, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was established. 5 years later, the world's first greenhouse gas emission reduction treaty, called Kyoto Protocol, happened. The outcome of this protocol was global average temperature must not exceed 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. It was the first time 2 degrees Celsius temperature was globally advertised. However, between 1997 and 2009, scientists realized that it was not possible to cut emissions fast enough to meet the global temperature target of 2 degrees Celsius. So, when they met for the COP conference in Copenhagen that year, they introduced the new target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Not only that, they also emphasized that just reducing the emission is not enough. What was also needed was to actively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Then the new term was born, called net zero. Net zero basically means the total removal of gases from the atmosphere balances out the total emission. So there are two things we have to remember. We have to reduce the emission and at the same time take the gas out of the atmosphere. Fast forward to Paris Agreement in 2015. More than 190 countries proudly started setting the date their country would meet the net zero. Many countries chose 2050, but it's easier said than done. It turned out that meeting the target of net zero by 2050 is far more complicated than we would think. 6 years since the Paris Agreement, in COP26 conference, countries realized that the target of 2050 is too ambitious. Reducing the emission might be easier, but the hardest part is taking the gases out of the atmosphere. So how do we get to net zero? Achieving net zero means we have to remove billions of gases out of atmosphere per year. With calculation, it turns out to be 1 billion tons CO2 by 2025. One of the obvious natural solutions is reforestation, as forests do this naturally. But the ambition is so huge that it needs a man-made solution. The current small-scale projects in development, even with expensive pieces of equipment, could remove only around 150 million tons of CO2 by 2025. To be able to meet the target, we first have to understand how much greenhouse gases are emitted per sector and per country. Then we can distinguish different sectors that need immediate attention in terms of reducing the emission contribution. As said earlier, reducing the emission is the easier part. We use less technical material as possible, stay away from fossil fuels, use clean energies and biodegradable materials, and apply circular economy principles. However, for the man-made solution to remove gases from the atmosphere, it requires time and money in the level that it becomes difficult to afford for the majority of the countries. Who is responsible for achieving net zero? Basically, the whole citizen. We all have a responsibility to meet the target, but things get complicated as it requires a huge amount of money. Who is going to pay for this has been a huge debate currently and was one of the major agendas of COP26. To reach net zero emissions by 2050, annual clean energy investment worldwide will need to be more than triple by 2030 to around $4 trillion. Politically, it becomes a difficult topic. Some developing and underdeveloped countries have asked help from developed countries for achieving their part of the target. Also, for developed countries, it's not easy to come up with that much cash. They obviously do not want to take the full responsibilities and think contributions should be based on how much each country is emitting. On the other hand, big emitters like India and China think that they may be big manufacturers, but their products are consumed in Europe or America, so this should help them to meet the target. Well, whoever pays, and whether we meet the target by 2050 or not, we actually don't have to wait until 2050 to see this, because the sign now is not very good. While the countries are confused about who is going to pay for the net zero, some countries are still struggling internally to meet the first part of net zero, that is, to reduce the emission. Do you think we can reach net zero by 2050? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.